Hi, everyone. Um, so this is the second uh, class on the Four Great Vows of Mahayana Buddhism. Um, and as you can see, if you didn't already know, uh, if you look over here on the right side of the screen, you'll notice that the Four Great Vows of Mahayana Buddhism are written in traditional Chinese characters over here. So that's really what this class is about, is learning the Four Great Vows using the traditional Chinese characters, the way they were originally written. Now, in the first class, this is the second, and there are four altogether. In the first class, we looked at the title, and in this class, we're going to look at the first vow, which is here. Highlight that again. Yeah. The title is the first line, which only has 4 characters. Each of the vows has 7 characters. And not only does each of the vows have the same number of characters, that is 7, these 7 characters in each vow follow the same pattern. First of all, the first 2 characters describe what the vow is about. And so in the first vow is about sentient beings. And we'll talk about that more. The next 2 characters, which always starts with the character Wu, which is more or less the Mandarin pronunciation, or Mu, if you are a student of Zen in either the Korean or Japanese traditions, you're probably more familiar with this character as Mu. So the second 2 characters, always starting with Mu, modifies the first 2 characters. So characters 1 and 2, what the vow is about. In the case of the first vow, sentient beings. Second 2 characters, modification. Characters 3 and 4. Character 3 is always Mu. And so, in this case, is sentient beings without limit. There are other translations of that. We'll talk about that. But sentient beings without limit. That's the first 2 characters. First 4 characters. Sorry. Told you there's always 7 characters in each line, in each vow. We talked about the first 4. The characters 5 and 6 are always the same. Oh, see, I made a mistake on this slide. I'm going to correct it in real time. Here we go. Let's see if I can get the paste format correctly. There we go. The next 2 characters, characters 5 and 6, are always the same. They're always the 2 characters that just mean vow. So sentient beings without limit, I or we vow, and then what is the vow? What is the vow itself? And that's always the last character. The last character is what is being vowed. And in the first vow, of course, the last character is a character, and we'll get to this in more detail. That means to save, to liberate, to free from samsara. All right. Now, let's just get this in. All right. So now, the first 2 characters mean sentient beings. This is just going over the same thing again. What the vow is about. Second 2 characters, always starting with Mu, without limit, describing the first 2 characters, describing the object of the vow. The subject of the vow is always, so some people chant or recite the 4 Great Vows in English. They say I. Some people say we. And some people will say we when they're in a group. Some people will say I if they're doing this on their own. the subject, the one who is vowing, is always oneself or the group of people who are doing this together. The object is the first two characters. The third and fourth characters, with the third one always being mu or wu, is something about the first two characters, sentient beings without limit. The fifth and sixth characters, always the same. The two characters that mean vow, we talked about them in the first class, because that's also in the title of the Four Great Vows, because the title of the Four Great Vows is Four Great Vows. And then the sixth character is, the seventh character is what one is vowing. And in this case, it is to save, liberate, or to ferry across from samsara to nirvana, or release from samsara. Now, so let's look at sentient beings a little bit more detail. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the actual meaning of sentient beings, what it means in Chinese, what it means in Sanskrit, what it means in English. You know, the words sentient beings are, it's interesting. Sometimes we use normal English words to talk about Buddhist ideas. Sometimes we use words from Sanskrit. Dharma is not an English word. Sangha, Buddha, karma, nirvana. In this case, though, English-speaking Buddhists very commonly just use the phrase sentient beings, which in Chinese is written like this. And what do these characters actually mean in the Chinese language? So this is a very good source to be aware of on the internet, the Digital Dictionary of Buddhism. And this is a definition based upon what's written there in the Digital Dictionary of Buddhism. A being, living being, all living beings. And this is very interesting. It says here, this term has pre-Buddhist roots in Chinese classics, such as the Li Ji and the Zhuangzi. And it was used, so that they took an already existing word or phrase in Chinese and used it to translate the Sanskrit sattva. And so here are two examples of where one finds this two-character combination in Chinese literature before the introduction of Buddhism into China. From the Book of Rites, there's this phrase here, this 4 characters, which means roughly in English, all living things must die. I hope that's not news to anybody, but that is the truth. Then from the Zhuangzi, or I guess in proper Mandarin, it would be something closer to Zhuangzi, but I don't know how to speak Mandarin. These characters mean something like fulfillment of nature is the proper goal of all living beings. Okay, so those are just two examples showing that when Buddhism came to China, just as in some cases English-speaking Buddhists use English words to describe Buddhist concepts, there were already existing Chinese words and phrases that were used to describe what was called in Sanskrit sattva, or sentient being, what we call in English sentient being. Speaking of English, what about this phrase sentient beings? And so this is actually a little interesting. As early as the 1750s, the phrase sentient beings is found in the English language in and this is actually kind of interesting to the history of Buddhism in the West, and the prehistory of Buddhism in the West. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's discourse on inequality contains some very interesting things to say about sentient beings, whatever that is in French. It was translated into English as the phrase sentient being. And here's just a nice quote from the English translation. The Discourse on Inequality was written in, I think, around 1755, and was soon after that translated into English. It was an international bestseller back in the day. So long as he does not resist the internal impulse of compassion, he, this is a human being, will never hurt any other man, nor even any sentient being, except on those lawful occasions on which his preservation is concerned, and he is obliged to give himself the preference. By this method, it's interesting how, see, Word is trying to correct Jean-Jacques Rousseau here. I wonder what this correction is. This spelling. Oh, yeah, is trying to correct the English. Okay, anyway. By this method, we also put an end to the time-honored disputes concerning blah, blah, blah. So the basic idea here being that sensibility, that is, the ability to feel, and in particular, in this case, to feel pain, is what makes a sentient being sentient. They can feel pain, they can suffer. Oh, I mean, this sounds almost like something that the Buddha would say. They can suffer. Buddha was big on talking about suffering, right? And since this quality of being able to suffer is common to not just to human beings, but to all sentient beings, then we should not make them suffer. All right, so if we break this two-character word down, what do we get? The first character in the Chinese phrase for sentient being is huáng, which means something like many. So actually, some translations of the Four Great Vows start with the many beings are numberless, which is a bit redundant. The many beings are numberless, but it's actually not a bad translation of the Chinese. So huáng is a compound, a character that is made of components that you can separate out. And they're stacked on top of each other. This is one of the common ways of making new characters in Chinese that we talked about in the first lesson, where we talked about the title. The title has several, well, each character in the title is a character that can be broken down into components. And the first character in the first vow can also be broken down into components. So here's that character. The first component is shui, something like that. And another character that's pronounced zhang, same as the main character that these two characters are components of. So here's a slightly more elaborate definition. Zhang can mean multitude, throng, manifold, numerous, sundry, diverse. It can also just mean many. Sometimes it means all. Sometimes it means everyone, everything. So Chinese characters are a lot like English words in the sense that they can mean many different things. So the first component of zhang is this word that you can just say it means blood, but more completely, the definition is blood, sanguinary, blood ties, tears so grievous that they are bloody, blood red in color. The part of this is blood and things that are associated with blood, in particular ties of kinship or family ties. The second component of zhang down here, which is also zhang, is a very uncommon character. And if you do a little research on this character, it's kind of made up of three characters, which are put together in a funny way to make up three characters that mean each of which means person. So you can see there's actually 6 individual strokes in this character if you kind of look at it. And actually we'll look at the stroke order. Well, I don't know if we'll look at it for this one, but And we will talk about strokes. And uh, the character for person, which we will look at momentarily, or human being, has 2 strokes in it. And if you take those 2 strokes and you multiply it by 3, you get 6. And if you rearrange those strokes in a certain way, you end up with this character here. And so one way of understanding this character is that it basically says if you have 3 people, that's a crowd, or a multitude. Fortunately or unfortunately, this is a not very common character. In fact, the character huáng itself is not particularly common in Chinese, and there are different forms of this character. So the form that I'm using in this class is the form of the character that you'll find in Korea, which is where my teacher's teacher came from. And so the version of the 4 vows that, well, that everybody, pretty much everybody uses the same version of the 4 vows, which originally comes from Ji Yi, who lived over about 14 centuries ago in China. But sometimes different people write the characters somewhat differently. And this is one of those times. Let's not spend any more time talking about that. So the first component of a huáng, which is this shui, or blood, it's actually made up of 2 components. You see that it has a little notch on the top, a little hat or check or slash on the top. If you take that off, which you can represent that by this character that just doesn't really have much meaning on its own. It's not really, hardly ever, if ever, encountered as a standalone character. But the second part, this is a character that shows up. In fact, it will show up again. Let me see, where will it show up again? It'll show up in the second vow, as a matter of fact, as a component of one of the characters in the second vow. And this is min. This is which means a plate or a vessel of some sort, a serving, possibly a serving dish. So all of that on just the first character of the first part of the first vow. The second part, the second character of the first part, which is the second character of sentient beings, is sheng, the character that means, if you had to give just a single word translation of it, you might say birth or born or life, and I'll talk about that very shortly. But it's made up of 2 components. The first of which is both of which are very nice, simple. This is itself, sheng, or birth, is a pretty nice, simple, not too complicated, not too many strokes. And when you break it up into its components, they in turn are even simpler. So the first is tu, which means earth. The second is ren, which means person. We'll talk more about each of those just right now, in fact. So this first character actually has a lot of different uses in Chinese, and here are some of them. It can mean live, be alive, exist, living being, the act of living, to bring into existence or to give birth to. And it can also mean, let's correct this right here, again in real time, fresh, green, or ripe. It can also refer to nature, natural instinct, or inherent character. So the second, so sheng, like I said, is made up of 2 components. The first of which is sheng is made up of 2 components. The first of which is tu, or earth. And this character, which is a fairly common Chinese word with a lot of different meanings: earth, soil, land, ground, native land, home ground, local, common, rustic, god of the soil. And it's also interesting, one of the 5 agents or elements or phases of wuxing, which is the five elements of there are 5 elements. If you know anything about Chinese metaphysics, then you know what wuxing is. If you don't, just Google it, and then you will know. All right. So, what about the second component? Go to the next slide. And so the second component of Sheng, the character for birth, is Ren, which means a person, a human being, man, mankind, humankind. It can also refer to others. So it's not just people in general, but other people, the other ones. Now, one of the interesting things about this component is that it is a radical form of the character for person. I think I said that we were going to talk about the character for person. So since this is the radical form of this character, they both have the same pinyin pronunciation, which is Ren. This is not just any radical form. This is the top radical form. So radicals are a kind of component, a special kind of component. And since they are components of characters, as we've talked about, when you make a character out of components, sometimes the components are stacked on top of each other. Sometimes the components are brought together side by side. Sometimes one component has another component inside of it. And so when components are being stacked on top of each other, if Ren is the first component on the top, then this is the form that it's in. It's more common to find Ren as a component on the left side of a character, when characters are put together side by side. If Ren is a component on the left side, then it looks like this. And so this radical, this character, and this radical all have the same pronunciation, all mean the same thing. And not only is this a character that can be used on its own, it also appears sometimes as a component. So this is both the component form of Ren and the character Ren itself. All right, so we have like 12 minutes to go in this class. I'm just trying to keep track of time. Then we'll have a 5-minute break. Now, the next characters, we've done the first two, sentient beings, and we've looked at the components of them. Now, the third character is always Mu. For the first, second, third, and fourth vows, the 4 vows, the third character, always Mu. Or Wu, which is the proper Chinese pronunciation. It's not the proper Chinese pronunciation because I can't do the proper Chinese pronunciation, but it's something like Wu, right? And it's made up of the same component that we saw in the character for birth, Sheng. It's also the first or top component. The next component of Wu is Shi, or 40. Talk a little bit about that. This is a component, the third component we talked about in the first class, Yi, which just means one. It's just a single line. And then, so this character, Wu, is constructed top to bottom. And the final character is is Ho, or fire. I like the font. Oh yeah, that's the right font. Okay. Now, more, so you can say, what does Wu mean? Here I just say, means no. And very often, if you study Zen, very often people are just told that Wu means no, or sometimes people are taught Wu doesn't mean no. Oh, that's a subject for another series of classes. But Wu is a perfectly good job. Perfectly good a word in everyday ordinary Chinese. It just means no. Or it also, so here's a more complete definition. To be without, to lack, to have nothing, rhetorically dismissive, negative. Then this last part of this definition is kind of interesting. A rhetorically dismissive negative, something to contemplate the next time you're contemplating the koan mu. Um, so we already talked about the first component of mu or wu. The second component is qi or 40. This is not a commonly encountered, even when you're looking at numbers in Chinese. You're rarely going to see this. When someone wants to say 40 in Chinese or write 40 in Chinese, they use the character for 4, which of course is the first character in the Four Great Vows, and then they have the character for 10. This is also kind of how we write 40 in English, 40. So, but we write 0 instead of the whole 10. We've already done yi, 1. That was covered in the first class, and there's not much to cover there, is there? This four little lines at the bottom of a character, 4 little legs, like a character has 4 legs, a 4-legged character. This is the bottom radical form of the character for fire, Wu. So just as Ren is Ren, whether it's written as the character Ren or as the top radical Ren or as the left radical Ren, Huo is always Huo. It always means fire. This is the, if you write fire as a standalone word, this is how you would write it. And it means a fire, fiery, a blaze, to start a fire, to enkindle a torch or a firebrand. And remember we said that Tu, or earth, was one of the 5 elements. Fire, of course, is also one of the 5 elements. Yeah, and this is just as this is the bottom character form, you will find a kind of a compressed version of this whole character when it's used as a left radical. I'm not sure if I think there will be at least one character that we're going to cover in this class that will make use of that. Now, so the third character is always Wu or Mu. Where are we? Let's see. Oh yeah, good. So the third character is always Wu or Mu, and so the third and fourth characters are always something that modifies the first 2 characters. So what is it that sentient beings are without? At least when sentient beings are in the Four Great Vows, sentient beings are without limit or boundary, and that is this character here, beyond. This is also not a very commonly encountered character in Chinese, but it is made up of 4 components that are quite common in Chinese. So the first of these 4 components is chuo, or walk, and this is a component of quite possibly the most famous word or character in Chinese, Dao, the great Tao. And in fact, in the 4th vow, when we say the Buddha way is inconceivable, unsurpassed, uncontrived, there's various translations. The Buddha way is the character for Buddha, followed by the character for Tao, which we'll talk about in the last class in this class series. But one component of that Tao is this character that means walk. Now the second component, mian, is not common in Chinese at all, but it is. So here, so this is what we just talked about. This is the character for walk, and in Chinese, I think I'll make that bold. There we go. Prefer it in bold. All right. So the first component of beyond is the one very common component for to walk. The second component is mian, which means to look into the distance. It's not a very common uh, uh, Chinese character at all, but it's made up of three very common characters. So that's why I said that this character, the fourth character in the first vow, is not common, but it's worth learning because it contains four components that show up a lot. Whether you're looking at Buddhist words in Chinese or just Chinese in general, these are all very common components. So this is the character Mian, and this is the character Mian, and I wanted to make it nice and big to help you see how these parts go together. Now, you might recall from the first lesson, we've already covered this character, Ji, which, by the way, I also mentioned in passing in the first lesson that this character Ji is part of the name of Avalokiteshvara in the Heart Sutra. So if you, the way that I've learned to chant the Heart Sutra, it goes Mahabanya Bharamilta. No, wait, yeah, Mahabanya Bharamilta Shimgyong. That's the title of the Heart Sutra in my Americanized, accented pronunciation of the way that Koreans pronounce the characters in the title to the Heart Sutra. And then the first three characters of the Heart Sutra itself, I pronounce as Kwanjaje Bosal, which is the Korean pronunciation for one of the Chinese names of Avalokiteshvara. And the middle character in that name is this character, Z, or as it turns out it's pronounced by Koreans as Ja. Okay, so anyway, this character, Mian, which is one of the main components of Bian, which is the fourth character in the first vow, right? Made up of these three components stacked on top of each other. They're not just stacked on top of each other, they're really kind of smushed together that way. And I'm going to look at that in just a second. In fact, we'll look at that after the break. Well, we'll look at it a little bit before and then more after. But the top character is Z. The middle character is Shui, which just means whole. This is actually one of the components of the character for emptiness, which I think it'll be included either in this lesson or the next. And then the bottom character is the character for Fang, which means upright. And so all three of these are good, very good characters to know if you're building your vocabulary in Chinese. So, as advertised, how is this character Mian put together? So this is the one of the two components of Bian, which is the fourth character, Bian, which means boundary. So this is a thing that sentient beings do not have. They have no limit. They have no boundary. They go on forever. We're going to stop just a second for a break. This look right here. I'm going to leave this up during the break. Is how Mian is put together. So let me just bring up. Here we are. Oh yeah, that was not good. Let me go to the playlist. We're going to. Yeah. Okay. And we now have a 5-minute break.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome back. Let's see, let's go to sharing again. And so we're doing pretty good on time. But one of the reasons why we're doing good on time is because I forgot to start the first session of this class with chanting. So now I'm going to do the short version of the homage to the three jewels, followed by the Heart Sutra. And let's do that now. Mute myself if I can. I'll just be quiet. All right. Now, oops. Yeah. Stop that. Okay. Here we are. Back from the break. Back from chanting the short version of the homage to the three jewels, which it's always good to know the short version of any practice. So the short version of the homage to the three jewels is just the first part up until you do the mantra for offering incense. Oh, hey, I'm going to be teaching a class on traditional Buddhist chanting starting in March. And the very first chant that we're going to talk about in that class is the homage to the three jewels. So stay tuned for further updates on that. Before the break, we were looking at how this character, which is a component, the reason why we're looking at this character, Mian, is because it is a Bian is broken up into two components, one of which is Mian, to look into the distance. So Bian has a pretty straightforward meaning, limits, boundaries, where something stops. But it's not a very common Chinese character. Chuo is a very common component found all over the place in Chinese characters. Mian is a very uncommon character or component, but it's made up of three common character components, and it is an extremely good example of the process of how components become compressed when they're stuck together, because, as it's written, if you see down here at the bottom of this slide, notice that each individual component character fits inside a square. And then when those components are combined, they still have to fit inside the same square. So the square that contains Z is the same size as the component that contains Shui. It's the same size as the square that contains huáng, and it's also the same size as the square that has to contain all of them when they are put together to make huáng. And that's so. Like Chinese was originally written up and down, which meant that all the characters had to have more or less the same width, so that they make nice columns. Today, it's very common to find Chinese written across, and in order for the characters to make nice rows when they're written across, they have the same height. I don't know if that's why, but it just is the fact with Chinese characters that they're all supposed to take up the same amount of space, both in terms of height and width. And so when you put them together to make, compound characters, to make a character with many components, each of which is a character in its own right, they get compressed, or as I usually say, mushed. Now, the last character of the first vow is the character du, which means to, well, usually we say, English-speaking Buddhists usually say save. Well, we're going to look at that. First, let's look at its components. So du, which is over here on the right side of the screen. I keep this slide up, both so that you always kind of can see the Four Great Vows, which is what the whole thing is about, as well as so that I can see and you can see the schedule. Regardless of what time you're watching this, the first session is supposed to take 35 minutes and there's a 5-minute break, and then the second session is supposed to take 35 minutes and then there's a 10-minute break, and the last session is supposed to take 35 minutes. I think I'm doing the math right there. But anyway, this last character here in the fourth vow, the last character for each of the vows is always the thing that you are vowing to do. And so, what you're vowing to do with respect to the first two characters in the vow. So, the first two characters in the first vow are sentient beings, and you're vowing to save them. First two characters in the second vow are what's called in Sanskrit the kleshas. There's various ways of translating this. Sometimes it's called delusion, sometimes it's called the passions, sometimes it's called greed, hatred, and ignorance. Depending upon which translation you're using, there's all translated the same thing, which is two characters. That is actually the Chinese Buddhist technical term to translate the Sanskrit kleshas, which is often translated as I don't know. Anyway, the kleshas. Sometimes it's better to leave it untranslated. And what are you vowing to do with the kleshas? Get rid of them. Basically, that's what this character means. The third vow, first two characters of the third vow is dharma, gates, vow to learn them. Buddha way, vow to attain it. Okay, but let's get back to the first vow. We're vowing to save. But what does this really mean? What does it mean to save? I mean, it's an excellent thing to look into, both to study and to see what other people have said about it, but also to look into it for yourself. What could it possibly mean to save one being, let alone all beings? Before going into that, let's just look briefly at the components that go into make up this character. They're very nice. I like these components. They're nice and simple. They're easy to write, and they have nice simple meanings. And two of them are quite common. This one, huáng, which means vast. If you, I'm gonna make this bigger, just very briefly. One of the common ways of describing this character is that it is a cliff with a little house on it. And if you are fortunate enough, which I'm not, but if you're fortunate enough to live in a little house on a cliff, it gives you a very nice view. It gives you a very nice view, and in what you can see on a house that's on the edge of a cliff, you can see vastness. So this is just a character that means vast, and it's referring to the kind of view that you get if you live in a house on a cliff. The second component is neon, which is a character, a very simple character with a very simple meaning. It means 20. It's actually a fairly common component, but usually Chinese people do not write 20 this way. Usually they write 20 with a 2 and a 10. And the third component of du is yo, which means again. And again, this is a very commonly encountered component in lots of characters. Okay, but then let's get to this. What does du really mean? We talked about what does sentient beings really mean, and so what does it mean to save them, or to save anything or anyone? So once again, we revert to the Digital Dictionary of Buddhism at www.buddhism-dict.net, which is an excellent resource. So as you can see, the Digital Dictionary of Buddhism gets a lot of mileage out of this particular character. But the main thing, the main takeaway from this slide is that the primary meaning is to cross over to the shore of liberation. That means to save sentient beings. And it's not really that surprising. If you're a Mahayana Buddhist, to save sentient beings means to liberate them from samsara. Which, of course, the Four Great Vows are often referred to as the Bodhisattva vows, and that's what Bodhisattvas vow to do, right? Which is why this is the first vow. All right. So it turns out, though, that in addition to having this very clear in terms of like, it's a nice, neat definition that is easy to write down, much more difficult to put into practice, much less to really to comprehend and to understand in any meaningful way. But it's a straightforward definition for a Buddhist, especially a Mahayana Buddhist. But it turns out, going to the next slide, that this character du is a fairly commonly encountered character in the modern Chinese language. Down here at the bottom of the slide, so okay, right up here, just as you can do Google searches and look for things. So if you take a character, put it into a Google search field, and then put a space, and then say Buddhism. So character space Buddhism, and often that will take you directly to the Digital Dictionary of Buddhism or some other Buddhist page where they give definitions of Buddhist terms. If instead you take a character in a Google search field, put a space, and then put in the three letters, the English letters HSK, which is the English acronym for the standardized tests in learning basic Chinese, you'll find out what ordinary, everyday people in the street who may or may not be Buddhists, how they use the word. And so here's all the, to pass, to spend time, measure, limit, extent. Anyway, so, and this is a word that if you are studying Chinese to become proficient, at least basically proficient in Chinese, this is a character that will come up that you'll have to know for at least for the HSK4 level, which is, HSK4 is maybe about the level of a second grader in China. And you even if you pass that test, you're unlikely to be as fluent in Chinese as a Chinese second grader is, but you might know the same number of characters as that Chinese second grader. And so it's just good to know that the words that we're using, even the ones that have a very particular meaning in Buddhism, are not just Buddhist technical terms. They're also Chinese words that ordinary Chinese people will use, even when they're not talking about Buddhism, even if they are not themselves Buddhists or have any interest in Buddhism. They're just regular Chinese words. So this is kind of what we've covered so far. These characters. This is the first character, second character. Oh yeah, so I didn't include mu on here, and I didn't include beyond on here because they're not going to be on the homework for this. So what we're going to do in this class, when you do the homework for this class, which I strongly encourage you to do, the character mu and the character beyond will not be on the homework. The components of those characters will be. And I'm trying to, not overwhelm people with, I want the homework itself to be doable. So the homework involves a lot of writing of characters. And so I'm going to be asking you to do components of the more complicated characters first, and then put them together. So, which brings, so we are doing the last character of the first vow, and then we're also doing the two relatively complicated characters, which were already, if you look over on the right side of the screen, they were already in the title of the Four Great Vows, which was covered in the first class. But again, in the homework for the first class, I only assigned the components of those characters. Now, if you did that, you should be well prepared to put those components together to actually write the characters themselves. Which, of course, the characters for vow show up in all the vows as well as in the title. Now, in addition to these characters, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters, there's a bunch of components that are either in the homework or are part of the homework, and I'll explain that a little bit. This is the, what was this? This is the one that meant, this is the one that meant blood, all right? This is the one that means, and so neither of these is like a really common word, but you got to know them to know the Four Great Vows. These are, these three. So this is the 1, 2 for Earth, right? And then we also have these 3 characters. They're all different forms of Ren, which means person. And then this was, I don't know, Shi or something. It means 40. This is fire. This is to walk. This is the one that means to look off in the distance. This is the one that means a pit or a cave or a hole. This is the one that means upright. This is the one that means vast. This is the one that means 20. And this is the one that means again. And so in addition to learning these 5 characters and these components over here, I want you to also learn these extra characters. I call them extra because they're made by rearranging the components. Or in some cases, I have very sneakily introduced new components that are good to learn while you're learning these other components. And in particular, this component here, or character, actually there are 2 characters, this means ox. And so one of the teachings, one of the most fundamental teachings of Zen is the 10 ox herding pictures. And so this is the ox in the 10 ox herding pictures. This is a character that means work right here. And we're gonna, let's see, if I have time, I will talk about these in more depth. If not, and then there's some other ones. This is one that means sometimes this is called rice, but it actually means a grain of rice or uncooked rice, or I think it can be more generally grains of anything. This is a nice character. This means cake, and so this one means store. This is a store. Or is this one store, or is it anyway? Yeah. This is a store or a shop, and this one means close. Something's close. This one is a character that means yellow, and it's part of the it's the main component of the character for Han, as in Han Chinese. So, yeah, so these next couple of slides go over these extra characters a little bit, and I'll come back to them if we have time, but I'm anticipating, there's some important things to talk about. Okay, they really need to be talked about in this class, and some of this you're just going to have to look over. These are good for practice, okay, and they're putting back together components that have already been covered, but in the process of rearranging these components, you can come up with new characters. And for the most part, the characters are not that complicated. Did I mention the one that means cake? Yeah, I think I did. Cake. Character for cake. All right. Gong, which means work. Anyway, so if you learn all these characters that we've studied in this class so far, what good are they? What good is it? So if you're interested in learning Chinese, most of these characters are very useful for learning Chinese, and even the ones that aren't usually have components that themselves are. And so this tells you what HSK level you'll encounter these various components and characters that we've covered so far. HSK 6 is all the way up to maybe the level of a Chinese fourth grader. So there's a lot of the material that we've covered that is just very basic Chinese that you would want to learn if you were just learning Chinese for the sake of knowing the most widely spoken language on the planet. Not a bad idea. Also, if you're interested in learning Chinese for its application, to better understand, if that's the right word, Buddhism. These are all components that are found in the Heart Sutra. And this kind of a breakdown was also included in the first class. As we go along, the large majority of all the material that we're covering in these classes, while being essential for learning, if you want to learn how to write out and to know the Four Great Vows in traditional Chinese characters, you're also learning things that can be generalized to other important things that you might also want to know, such as the Heart Sutra and many other Chinese Buddhist texts and teachings, as well as just learning the Chinese language itself. And not just, so Zhi Yi wrote the Four Great Vows a long time ago. The style of Chinese that he wrote in was classical Chinese, but for the most part, what we're learning is also very, very applicable to anyone wanting to learn modern Chinese. Okay, so here's a recap of everything that has been covered. Some of it a little too quickly, and I want you to go, especially those extra characters. Those would be good for you to go and look at those slides and to practice writing those characters. This is the first vow. These are the 7 characters of the first vow. The first character is new to us in this series of classes. It has 3 components that are new. The second character is also new. Stop highlighting things. So I figured out how to turn off the tooltips when I'm just hovering over a character. I haven't figured out how to turn off the tooltips when I've actually highlighted some text. It automatically, Word wants to show this crap on the screen, which I find annoying. I find it annoying if I don't want it to be there. Of course, it's very helpful if I do want it to be there, but when I'm doing a presentation, I really don't want it to be there. But anyway, so first character is new, and it has 3 components that are new. Second character is new, and it has 2 components that are new. It has one of its components, or no, that's right. Yeah. Okay, it only has 2 components. The second character, third character, which is the same in every vowel, the third character is always wu in Chinese or mu in Korean or Japanese. It has two new components. It also has this version of ren, has the top component, and it also has just a single line, yi, the number one, as a component. Both of those, so the top radical form for ren was covered in the character before. The second character and third character both have that. Yi was covered in the first class where we talked about the title. So the character for 40 and the bottom component, bottom radical form of fire, huo, are both new components in the character for wu or mu. Beyond has four new components. It also has a repeated component, which was Ji, the top component here on the right side. But these are new components that are part of this character. And both Mu and Beyond, I'm going to leave doing the whole character until the homework for the next class. For this class, I'm going to assign as homework the components or things made up of these components for practice. The next two characters, the fifth and sixth character in the first vow, are this fifth and sixth character in all the vows, and they are the characters that just mean vow. The last character, the seventh character, is a new character do, which means to save or to ferry across to the other side, to release from samsara. This has three components, vast and 20 and again. And then in addition to these, the extra characters that I'm assigning that will be in the homework for this class are down here as well. All right. Now, so in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to talk very briefly about Sino-Korean. What is Sino-Korean? So the prefix Sino in English means anything that has to do with China. And so Sino-Korean means something that is Sino-Korean means it has something to do with China and Korea. So Sino-Korean is one way of referring to the way that Korean people pronounce Chinese characters. So, for example, at the beginning of this session, in addition to the short version of the Amish of the Three Jewels and the full version of the Heart Sutra, those were both being chanted using the Korean pronunciation of Chinese characters. Both of those chants are traditionally written out by Korean Buddhists in Chinese characters, and then they pronounce them they pronounce them in Sino-Korean, right? So, how do you say Four Great Vows in? So this is the title of the Four Great Vows. How do you say that in Sino-Korean? You say Sa, Hong, So, Weon. And just to make our lives more interesting, Koreans have vowels that are not easy for English speakers to understand, to hear what the sound really is, because there are sounds that are not found in English. And so they're difficult for us to recognize and difficult for us to say. And so very often this will just be pronounced as Sa, Hong, So, Won, or Weon. But got that? Let's highlight that. I think I meant to have this highlighted already. I'm going to highlight this. Come on, why is it I need to highlight it? Probably because it thinks it's not spelled correctly. Anyway, um, Sa Hong So Won, Jung Sang Mu Byon So Won Do. Jung Sang Mu Byon So Won Do is more or less the Sino-Korean pronunciation of the first vow. Saong Sowon is more or less the Sino-Korean pronunciation of the title. Now you also notice up here I've written Hanja, Pinyin, and English. So Hanja is the Korean word for Chinese characters. All right. So now we've got a what time is it now? We've got 45 seconds more or less to go. So I'm going to go ahead and start the last break now. It's a 10-minute break. So we'll come back at just about 10 minutes. Okay. So I'm going to start the clock. And mute myself. Okay, so now let us start the final part of this class. Again, doing the short version of the homage to the three jewels, followed by the Great Dharani.
Ima
Okay. So we're talking about Sino-Korean before the break. And if you know the or if you've ever chanted the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra, then you've chanted the Four Great Vows in Sino-Korean. It's towards the end of the chant. One of the great things about the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra is that there's just a lot of really wonderful stuff that's in there. You might not know it, depending upon what you've been taught or how you've been taught about the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra. You might very well have just been taught, oh, just chant it. Think for yourself. Ancient Zen saying. Someone says, don't worry about what it means. Don't believe them. Try to find out. And it's not that difficult to find out. In fact, one of the reasons why I'm teaching these classes is for people who want to find out for themselves what some of this stuff means. So, all right. Sa Hong So Wan Jung Seng Wu Yon So Wan Do Bo Ne Mu Jin So Wan Dan Bo Mun Mudiang So Wan Hak Boto Musang So Wan Song. Okay, so there's the Four Great Vows in Sino-Korean. Just not only is there Sino-Korean, there's also, of course, Sino-Japanese. Actually, Japanese people make much more use of Chinese characters than Korean people do in their, in their own language. So Korean, you can write Korean in Chinese characters, but generally speaking, people don't. Sometimes people use Chinese characters for certain words or phrases or for effect. You cannot write the Japanese language or you cannot write the Japanese language the way it is normally written without using Chinese characters. You can't read street signs in Japan without using Chinese characters. You can't read a cookbook in Japan. You can't read the TV guide or whatever, a newspaper or anything. You can't read a manga comic book without knowing Chinese characters. You actually can write hopefully you can write Japanese using just hiragana and katakana, but people don't. Maybe when you're like in first grade, you learn that, but you learn kanji. Okay, so speaking of kanji, yeah, let me I don't like to do this, but I'm just gonna make myself big on the screen. So this is my Godzilla T-shirt. This is the kanji for let's see if I can get it all on kaiju, which is Japanese for monster, and it's written using two kanji. First, kai means, what does it mean? Kai means unusual or strange, and ju means creature. So strange creature, which is basically the Japanese word for monster, kaiju. Godzilla is the king of the kaiju, the king of the monsters. Yeah, anyway. All right. So, oh yeah. All right. So I want to spend most of the last session, last part of this lesson, not talking about the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra, not talking about how to chant in Sino-Korean, not talking about Godzilla, but talking about how to actually write Chinese characters. Okay, so that's what we're going to spend the next 25 minutes talking about. So, my approach, and a lot of people, and I'm not a professional Chinese teacher by a very, 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 very long shot. I'm still a very beginner in terms of actually learning Chinese. So I can't say that I have my own teaching philosophy or anything like that. But there are people who are professional teachers of Chinese who know what they're doing. and the same thing comes up in people who, if you're learning Japanese, you have to learn kanji. Um, just as if you're learning Chinese, you have to learn Hanzi, which is the Chinese word for Chinese characters. One common way of teaching people how to write Chinese characters is to start writing. These are the strokes. These are how the characters are made out of the strokes, and that's kind of boring. The strokes don't really mean anything, and when people tell you, okay, so this is the way you're taught how to make the strokes. They say this character, yang, which means forever, contains all 8 strokes. This is fundamentally not true. And so, but if you look at each part of zhang, there's this dot up here, there's this short line up here, there's this long line up here, which ends in this little hook here. There's this line here, this line here, this line here, this line here. But so that's 8 strokes. But actually, this character does not have 8 strokes. And let me show you. Let me show you how this character is actually drawn. We're going to go back. Now that I showed you this during the first class, and I'm going to spend some time looking at this again. This is the mindisbuddha.org blog, which is my blog. And as part of this website or blog, I also have this web application called Writing the Ox, which I've changed it a little bit since the first class where I first introduced this. It now does have a help function that actually works. I've actually made some YouTube videos as well. One thing that I've done is I've initialized the application so that when it first shows up, what's shown is Master Huísong's Song of Dharma and Nature. But one thing I want to show you is that you can actually, if you are looking for a character, you can search. You can click on this button here, Ing Search. You see this button up here that I just clicked on, Ing Search? And then over here, it says, please enter some English. So let's enter in forever. If you were paying attention before when I was showing that one character that is supposed to contain all of the 8 strokes of Chinese characters, I searched on forever. If there is more than one character that is related to the word forever, it would have shown up. In this case, there's only one. This one, yang. Now I'm just making the screen a little too big. Here we go. All right, so now, I think it's about right. Okay, yang. If you recall from the first class, or if you don't, when a character is displayed in this application, there is a green square down towards the bottom that shows the stroke order animation. But to activate the stroke order animation, you have to click on this green button down at the very bottom of the page, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 strokes in yang, not 8. You have to take those 5 strokes and break them up into little bits, substrokes. And there's really no such thing as substrokes in Chinese. So anyway, when you're writing characters, you learn the strokes that are in that character. And you'll begin to recognize, oh yeah, this stroke looks, anyway. So I think it's more important to learn components, which are things that you can actually easily recognize from one character to another. And I'm going to make the screen the right size. And I'm also going to, to introduce you to this application. At the top of this application, I've done two videos on how to use this application that are on the same YouTube channel that has this is the class that you're watching right now. You can make selections. You can select all kinds of things. You get the thing that shows up when you first start up the application is this. I made it to initialize this because I think it's kind of pretty. But what we're actually interested in is the 4 Great Vows, and that's what you get if you click on the button up here that says 4 Vows. And whichever button you selected, the corresponding text is displayed over on this part of the screen, and the button that you just clicked is now yellow, indicating where you are. So let's at least look at some of these characters in the time that we have remaining and just kind of look at how they're drawn. You know, actually, I'm going to skip over this. Well, we'll look at it real quick. Okay, just to give you an idea. This is a somewhat complicated character. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 strokes. Yeah, that's a lot of strokes, right? Now, let's look at the second character. That first character is the character for multitude, or many, or all, as in all sentient beings, or everything born. The way I usually remember this is that the first character means everything, and the second character means born, everything born, and born in this sense meaning reborn into samsara over and over again through countless lifetimes. You know, if you want to get all Buddhist about it, you know. And so this is the character for birth or rebirth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. Let's look at it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, as I mentioned earlier, all Chinese characters take up roughly the same amount of space. And so you always want to orient especially when you're first learning characters, which I still am, okay? And you always want to orient your characters inside of a square, and it's very helpful to have these cross lines and diagonal lines drawn so you can see, where does this stroke go? This stroke goes over here, and you can orient yourself using these guidelines, okay? And that's why it's very useful to get paper. You can download a PDF that has these. It's just blank. It's not blank. It's a sheet of paper that has these blank squares. So blank squares with the guidelines already drawn in them. Yeah, I forget what they're called. Well, I mean, in English they're just called practice sheets. All right, and you look at each one of these strokes, and you see where, in relationship to the guidelines, the stroke goes, and then you just reproduce that yourself. And one thing that I do want to emphasize, I talked about this in the first class, and I want to emphasize this again, is that this is not what I'm teaching, what I'm trying to help people to learn, is not calligraphy. There's no fancy brushes, there's no expensive ink, there's no special paper that's involved. You get a notebook and a pen or a pencil. You can use a Sharpie if you want. Actually, I kind of like Sharpies. And this is a nice book. I just got it. I don't. Let me unshare. Let me make the screen big again, just because I want to, so you can see this book. Can you see it? It's called. Let's see. It's focused. Pretty good. Yeah, maybe. Hopefully, I'll put a link to it in the video. It's called "Learn to Write Chinese Characters" by a guy named Johann Bjorksten, which you might notice that's not a Chinese name. So this is a book written for people who aren't Chinese to learn Chinese characters. And I just got this book. I found a used copy in good shape. I think it was for less than $10. I don't recommend spending a lot of money on books. Oh, with one exception. Let me just give another little book plug. This is a student's dictionary of classical and medieval Chinese by Paul Kroll. And if you're just learning Chinese characters, I don't necessarily recommend that you run out and spend $40, $50, maybe even $60 on that book. But eventually you'll want to if you stick with it. And if you want to find out, because Ji wrote the Four Great Vows, Xuanzang wrote the Heart Sutra, the translations into Chinese a long time ago. And so the Chinese that they used is not modern Chinese. And so it's good to have a dictionary of classical and medieval Chinese. Anyway. Oh, but the one thing I wanted to mention about this, the first book by Bjorksten, is that he makes a point of telling people this. That now, of course, I can't find it in the book where he says this, but he says, there's two ways to learn how to write Chinese characters. The first is calligraphy, properly speaking. This is on page 2. The traditional way, using a brush. And so you don't just need a brush. You need a brush. You need special ink. You need special paper to do calligraphy right. And as Bjorksten points out, you also need a teacher, a real teacher, not just some guy on YouTube with a video or some books that you can, order from Amazon or some websites that you can look at. You'll need a real live flesh and blood teacher to learn calligraphy properly. He says, but the other way is to just use a pen and paper, which you'll need to know how to write these characters. If you want to learn calligraphy, you can't learn calligraphy without learning where the strokes go, which is really all we're talking about here. How to write the characters and what they mean. Anyway, so enough of that. Let's look at some more. Oh yeah. See, now this is a relatively simple character. You can see each of the 3 components pretty clearly in this. The part on the top, the cliff with the little house on it. You can see the if you recall, the character for 40, the number 40, was 4 up and down lines with 1 straight line through it. Well, we can actually see that. That's right here. Because another great thing, great, I'm going to oversell it, but another nice thing about this web application is that for every character, in addition to giving you the stroke order animation, it shows you the components. And 1, 2, 3, 4 up and down lines and 1 line straight through them. The reason why I wanted to go back and show that was so that we could see that this component, which means 20, is similar. It's got 2 up and down lines, 1 straight line, but then an additional line down here. Let's just see how that's actually written. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So it is actually 2 up and down lines, 1 line across, and then an additional line down the bottom. Another nice thing about this web application is that if you click on a character, it not only shows you the components of that character, but also shows you other characters that contain it. So there are a number of other, let's see what else. Let's find an interesting character that contains, here's one. It's actually part of the homework. I don't think it's in this month, but in the next lesson. This is she. This character is part of my Dharma name, which another nice thing about this web application is it tells you if a character appears in the Heart Sutra, it tells you how many times. It's an H dot something. This is the Sino-Korean pronunciation, say, and how many times it appears. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you'll notice a lot of times a Chinese character will, or the stroke in a Chinese character will change directions. What do I mean by change directions? Let's see. Yeah, let's go back to this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's watch that again and make it a little bit bigger. And I just want to focus on the 8th stroke. 8, that's the 8th stroke right there. And do it one more time. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that stroke, the 8th stroke, changes direction it doesn't all go in one way. There's actually like a very sharp turn while you're writing it, but it's all considered one stroke. So although I don't want to emphasize the importance of learning the strokes and learning the strokes in that diagram for the letter for forever, it's good to know about that. It's good to know what the different strokes are called. But at the same time, one of the things that's a little more important is knowing the order in which strokes are done. So depending as you go from top to bottom and left to right and different components of a character, and just one thing that I think is actually quite useful is that, let's see now. All right. So in this lesson, the homework, I'm not assigning this character, but I am assigning this character, which has 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, so I think we looked at some characters that had like 12 strokes, like moo or woo. And I said, oh, 12 strokes, that's a lot of strokes, but there are characters with more. This, which is only a component of this character, already has 15 strokes. But what I really want to look at right now is this character here, which was already covered in the first class, but I want to point out something that's kind of a general rule, that whenever you have a box of any kind, lots of characters have boxes, even just looking over here. Look, see over here. Here's a character with a box, here's a character with a box. An enclosed box. There's a certain, I don't even know if it's a rule, but there's a certain pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The pattern is that when you draw the box, the left side of the box is always a single stroke. Let's show the simplest possible example. The left side of the box is a single stroke. The top and the right is also a single stroke that changes direction, and then the bottom of the box closes the box. When the box has something inside of it, you don't close the box until you've written the thing that's inside of it. So left stroke, top and right, the inside part, and then you close the box. And so it is kind of important, although it isn't as important as some people will try to make it to be. It's good to learn the order of the strokes. Just because the strokes shouldn't be in some random order. You want to make the character to look the way it's supposed to look. It's best to try to put the strokes in the order that they're supposed to go. Let's see. Find another box. Find another relatively simple character with a box in it. All right. Now, this is a character 1. I'm just in the part with the box in it. This is the character for a sun. That's the it's a component of this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you always draw the left part of the box, The top and the right is a single stroke, whatever goes inside the box, and then close the box. And so this character, this is not a box. I'm going to do another one with the box. These are both characters that have this left radical. This is the left radical of the ren character for person. And so this character has three very simple components. This left radical person, this sun, and then a single line. All right. So let's see. We're getting very close to the end of the class. I want to go back and just take a look at the so this is the slide if you download the PDF version of these slides, you can read this. But this is just talking about how the strokes are the smallest unit of Chinese characters. There's strokes, there's components, and the radicals. It's kind of good to have a general idea, not to try to get too hung up on the precise definition, but to have a general idea of what the difference is between a stroke, a component, and a radical. And this is all the characters that I want you to do on the homework. Learn these. I talked in the first class last month about how to make your own practice sheets, and so that you can rewatch the last section of that first video. I'm also going to do a separate how-to video on making practice sheets. But now, let's see. Oh yeah, and this is everything that has been covered so far in terms of the characters that I think you should know, that you should be learning. I don't expect you to have even memorized the ones we did for the first class, but as you go along, you need to start becoming very, very familiar with these. You need to be looking at these and think, oh yeah, I think I recognize it. And so like some of these, sometimes it's good to have associations. One of the most complicated characters we've had so far. This is the character for cake or pastry or goodie, to eat. So it's kind of nice to know that one. Yeah. So thanks for listening to this video, especially if you've made it all the way through this far. We are halfway through the Four Great Vows. And now to end this, let's see if I can find it on here. Oh yeah. To end, we will recite together the Four Great Vows in English. This is one of many English translations of the Four Great Vows. And again, thank you very much for being here. And I hope you'll check out the next two classes and get all the way through, not just halfway through, but all the way through the Four Great Vows. And you can check out other material on the YouTube channel as well. Sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May whatever excellent qualities we have gained from this practice be extended for the benefit of all beings. Bye for now.